Henry II was born in Bavaria in 973. His father was Henry the Quarrelsome. As you can probably deduce from his nickname, Henry the Quarrelsome was a disruptive figure in European politics, leading revolts and plotting to seize power and become Holy Roman Emperor. He had attempted to usurp his infant cousin Otto III, and he gained some strong support, but the young boy's following was ultimately more loyal and stood firmly by the young German king and future emperor. As a character, the young Henry seems to have been more amenable than his father, who on his deathbed in August 995 gave his son strict instruction to not behave in the manner that he had done and to govern more wisely. After he had concluded his speech, Henry the Quarrelsome ordered the young Henry to head back to Bavaria and become Duke. The son left without hesitation. It may have affected him deeply to leave his father dying on his deathbed, but he obliged and headed back to Bavaria. In 999, Henry finally got married. His nobility may have thought it was not before time too. Henry was now in his mid-20s and would need to think about his succession. On this score, the marriage was a failure, as it produced no children, and the match would only benefit Henry in the sense that it extended his sphere of influence. Ironically, though, Henry himself would benefit from another ruler also not producing heirs. In 1002, the Holy Roman Emperor Otto III died, aged just 21 and without children. This caused the empire a major problem. Rebellions were a common theme in early medieval Europe, and Otto III, the year before he died, asked Henry, as Duke of Bavaria, to assist him in putting down trouble in Italy. The issue had been a plot to kidnap Otto III. The culprit was a man by the name of Gregory, who, according to Thietmar of Merzburg, was held in high regard by Otto, and had, up to that point at least, been a stalwart supporter of the emperor. Otto escaped that plot, but died the following year in 1002. There are question marks over the circumstances of his death. Was it murder? Otto was only 21, and Thietmar's chronicle tells of schemes and plots aplenty against the life of Otto from various would-be usurpers. There is no hard evidence of that, and his death can be considered suspicious, but it is worth bearing in mind Otto's father also died young. Otto II died aged just 28. During the plots against Otto III, there had been some who wished to gain the help of Duke Henry in deposing the emperor, but Henry had refused, stating his loyalty to the emperor. But with the emperor now dead, Henry made his move and did so at Otto's funeral. Thietmar of Merzburg tells of Henry trying to gain the support of key nobility to have himself crowned King of Germany, but he failed in this regard, and so he headed back to Germany, escorting the body of Otto. Back in Germany, a rival claimant was set up against Henry, with a certain Duke Hermann gaining support. As had happened before on the death of an emperor, the Holy Roman Empire faced division, not only in Germany, but elsewhere too. In Lombardy, they had their own king crowned, but this did not stop Henry from gaining further support, and he did so by gaining the support of the Saxons. And so again he made his move to be crowned King of Germany. This time he was more successful, and he was crowned King of Germany, but it did not go uncontested, and his support was far from universal. Henry, as a young man, is described as being conventionally pious and a brilliant pupil. He would need some of that brilliance simply to hold on to his throne. The aforementioned Hermann, Duke of Swabia, proved to be his biggest rival. By marriage, Hermann was related to Otto the Great, and this, he believed, trumped any claim Henry had. The dispute rumbled on, and deep into 1002, when Henry, after a serious struggle, finally defeated his rival. Perhaps wishing to avoid civil war, Hermann submitted with Henry, allowing him to keep Swabia. The following year, Henry effectively pinched the duchy back when Hermann died, leaving a young son as his heir. Henry disinherited Hermann's young son, and he didn't relinquish control of the Duchy of Swabia, and he added it to his ever-expanding territory. Through a combination of stubborn military action, diplomacy, and a little luck, Henry's power was now growing. Established as King of Germany, Henry now set his eyes further afield into Italy and beyond. After he had finally subdued the rebellion of Duke Hermann of Swabia, Henry continued to consolidate power as German king. In August of 1002, he had his wife crowned queen. After that, he progressed through his kingdom, trying to gain as much loyalty as he could. After a delay in Lotharingia, he eventually had oaths of loyalty sworn to him by the bishops there, who proceeded to accompany him to Aachen. At Aachen, the leading members of the Lotharingian nobility also joined in declaring their approval of Henry as their king. His prestige and authority was slowly growing. As I mentioned earlier, the men of Lombardy, on the death of Otto III, had decided to elect their own king. This was something they came to regret fairly quickly. The Lombard king, on hearing the growing strength of Henry in Germany, had taken steps to secure his own position. He strengthened defensive fortifications around Lombardy and garrisoned them, but he also disillusioned his clergy. In one instance, the Lombard king had thrown a bishop to the ground by his hair in a fit of petulant rage, after the bishop had said things the Lombard king did simply not want to hear. After matters such as these, the bishops of Lombardy asked for assistance from King Henry. The initial response to the Lombard king's mischief was not successful. The Germans sent into Italy were faced off by a headstrong and determined king in one of their first encounters. It was the Lombards who came out on top, although not without losses on his side as well. The Germans had been thrown off somewhat by the desertion of one of their key dukes. Whilst that was going on in Italy, Henry continued to progress through Germany, attempting to administer law and order where and when he could, and seems to have been relatively successful in doing so. In 1003, Henry received some grim news from Bohemia and Poland regarding two dukes by the name of Boleslav. Boleslav of Bohemia had acted quite unscrupulously and murdered his own brother-in-law, as well as a number of important noblemen. Boleslav of Poland had got wind of this. Not particularly sorry at what had happened, he summoned his counterpart to Poland, where he had him blinded and exiled. Boleslav of Poland then made his way swiftly to Prague, where he had himself made lord. He had used the crisis entirely to his own benefit.
This potentially gave Henry a problem. Boleslav had not only shown himself to be a ruthless man of action, but also was one who was now grown overmighty, and this simply wouldn't do. He demanded homage from Boleslav, who disregarded this request. For a short time, Henry let the situation rest, but it wasn't long before Boleslav was in open rebellion. Boleslav would be a huge problem for Henry throughout his reign. Through the remainder of 1003, Henry focused his attention on one of Boleslav's key allies, Margrave Henry. The rivalry between Margrave Henry and King Henry was personal, as their fathers had also clashed. King Henry, however, soon got on top, dealing him a serious blow by besieging one of the Margrave's burghs and killing a number of his men. Meanwhile, Boleslav continued to plot and conspire against the king, and lay waste to regions held by men loyal to King Henry. The Margrave now sensed that Boleslav was his best hope of success, and so went to join him. Before he departed his territory, he burned most of his region to the ground, perhaps hoping to ensure that the king wouldn't benefit from it. Henry was pleased when he saw this. He was tracking the Margrave's progress slowly, and so must have deduced that his enemy was running out of options. Into 1004, and there were tit-for-tat clashes. Boleslav attacked Bavaria, so Henry attacked one of his territories. There was finally some respite for the king, as the Margrave finally gave in and came grovelling to King Henry for forgiveness. King Henry had him imprisoned and turned his attentions back towards Italy. In Lombardy, the king there heard of Henry's arrival and became instantly terrified, and once again reinforced the defences of Lombardy. However, the Lombard king by now had alienated enough of his subjects that progress for Henry was not difficult, and in May 1004, Henry was crowned King of Italy. Henry, straight after his coronation as King of Italy, was faced by another rebellion. Evidently, the deposed Lombard king had done something right, and an uprising to reinstate him as king took place, with an attack being launched on Henry's palace. Henry was eventually successful in calming the situation down, and after securing the loyalty of the chastised rebels, continued to progress throughout Italy. Unlike some of his predecessors, Henry didn't linger in Italy too long, and made his way swiftly back to Germany. That was more than likely due to his concern about Boleslav, who continued to be a thorn in his side. Taking the attack to Boleslav in 1005, Henry marched into Poland, but paid a heavy price. To buy himself some time, he eventually managed to come to a peace agreement with Boleslav, but Henry must have known that that wouldn't be honoured for very long, and it was he himself who reneged on the treaty. Further periods of fighting and then peace broke out before a marriage arrangement was made, as Boleslav's son married a granddaughter of Otto II. Boleslav is known to history as the Brave, and he certainly showed that he was a man not shy of a fight. Even after Henry's succession as emperor in 1014, relations between the two continued in much the same vein. Henry had finally established what he thought would be a lasting peace in Lombardy, and perhaps thinking that the deposed Lombard king was a spent force, Henry decided to leave Italy and inspect other areas of his empire. But not being one to miss an opportunity, the deposed Lombard king attacked a city called Vercelli as soon as Henry's back was turned in the spring of 1014. A few months prior to these events, Henry had been crowned Holy Roman Emperor by Pope Benedict VIII, but the trouble with Lombardy may have taken the shine off Henry's imperial coronation. However, the following year, Henry received some good news on this front. The Lombard king was taken ill and went off to live, somewhat ironically given his trouble with the bishops earlier, as a monk. Then towards the end of 1015 he died, thus ending the career of a man who had been nothing but a nuisance to Henry, to Italy, and to Europe in general. The other main problem for Henry, both before and after his coronation as emperor, was Boleslav. Up until 1018, their relationship continued in much the same vein, with Henry carrying the fight to his erstwhile nemesis, marauding deep into Poland. Whilst the emperor did make gains, he also sustained significant losses. Peace agreements were made on more than one occasion, but they were quickly broken off. However, the losses for both sides were not sustainable, and Boleslav also had his sights set on putting his son on the throne of Kiev. In 1018, Boleslav finally recognized Henry as his overlord, while Henry promised to help Boleslav with his campaign in Kiev. Also in 1018, Henry gained another success when the aging ruler of Burgundy, Rudolf, made him his heir. Rudolf did so by declaring his intentions at a ceremony with all his nobility in attendance. To make sure of the deal, Rudolf swore an oath a second time. However, his plans were altered by the fact that Henry would die before him in 1024. Towards the end of his work, and also his own life, the chronicler Thietmar of Merseburg describes the generosity of Henry both to the church and to the poor. A ruler's relationship with the church would ultimately be the making or breaking of their reputation with chroniclers, and Henry seems to have not only been conventionally pious, but ensured that the church in his kingdom was well maintained. Henry, also like emperors before and after him, had a tetchy relationship with the Byzantine Empire, who controlled parts of Italy and was seeking to expand. He led an expedition to counter this particular threat, which ultimately ended in very little progress, and Henry died a couple of years later. It's quite hard to sum up Henry as a ruler. Ultimately, his reign, first as King of Germany and then as Emperor, was dominated by almost constant feuding with powerful enemies. Boleslav's reputation does show that Henry was more than capable militarily, however. Perhaps somewhat surprisingly, he had no heirs, and given that his own succession was a contested one, it might well have proved wiser for him to have actually produced heirs. However, when he died in 1024, Henry can still be regarded as a fine emperor.